I'm a lecturer and a researcher at the University of Melbourne. And I've been involved with the adoption community, I would say, for about 30 odd years. I'm not an adopted person myself, but I have had the privilege during my career to meet many people who are and to hear their truths. And that's partly what we're bringing tonight, the truth of what people have told me about their experiences and the impact that it's had on their lives, combined with the research that has been happening in Australia and internationally. So if we begin by acknowledging the lands of the First Nations people that we each find ourselves on, and they'll be different depending on where you are, we acknowledge and we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and to any First Nations people who are taking part in this webinar tonight. I'd like to acknowledge that many First Nations people have been impacted by forced adoption practices, and we hope that we can move forward with a sense of reconciliation and healing. I'd also like to acknowledge the work that Vanish does and the incredible resources and passion that they put in to all that they offer to everybody. And also to Shane Bull, who I believe has run similar webinars before, and she's kindly shared her information with me. So what we're going to do tonight, the format of what's going to happen, it's going to be a little bit interactive. So you might see in the chat that there are 3 little questions, and as you have time, if you could just fill those in, and they'll tell us about who you are within the adoption community. They'll tell us your rough geographical location, just so that we can understand the spread of the geographical spread and reach of this webinar. And also, I think it also asks what you're hoping to get from this webinar. And I'm hoping that what I've got to say and then the follow-up questions and responses will hit the spot there for you. So the actual content of what I will present in the next 60 odd minutes is how adoption can impact relationships, the common relational and attachment patterns and windows of tolerance that people can experience, those who are adopted, those who perhaps are family members, those who might be birth parents, they might be friends or partners. And we'll start to consider ways in which relationships can be healed and start to recover from all of the experiences that people have had. And I must say that while I will touch briefly on perhaps experiences of adoptive parents, birth parents, it mostly is targeted for people who are adopted and their partnerships. So as we move through this time together, as you are writing questions in the chat, keep in mind that we all need to be respectful of each other, that we are mindfully listening, I guess, to each other and to what is written, and that we're mindful and respectful in the way we share our opinions and insights. We all have different experiences and views and understanding of adoption. People come to different levels of understanding at different points in their life. Nothing is right or wrong. It's just the way people move themselves, and we just need to be aware and hold that with respect. And as we move through, I would encourage all of us to practice self-compassion. If you feel you need a little bit of time away from the presentation, you can certainly take your image off screen. You can certainly go onto mute. And if you feel you need just a moment or two away to get a cup of tea or to breathe more deeply, feel free to take that time. So as I said, it was interactive. So the first interaction for you guys is these 3 questions that I know Hannah has written in the chat. And if you have a moment just to fill those in and to make sure that you are comfortable, you're warm, cozy, you've got a cuppa if you need it, and that you're ready for the next 60 minutes. Okay. Because we're going to be speaking about some issues that, of course, could be triggering and that are very close to all of your hearts, I thought we would begin with an exercise that will help you to regulate your breathing and any stress that you're feeling. And this is a little exercise. We'll do it together in a moment, but it's an exercise that you can practice throughout the day, and you can take this away with you. And what it's meant to do, because of the way in which we breathe, it's meant to create rhythm, control, and balance in your breathing that sends the message of safety to your brain. So in a moment, when we do it together, I'll be asking you to inhale slowly for 4 seconds, and I'll count, to hold the breath for 4 seconds while I count, to exhale for 4 seconds while I count, and to hold the exhale for 4 seconds. We'll repeat that once more as well. So we'll have 2 cycles, and then we'll get into the presentation. Okay, so if you're nice and comfy, we're going to inhale 2, 3, 4, and hold 2, 3, 4, and exhale 2, 3, 4, and hold 2, 3, 4. And breathe normally. And we'll start again. Inhale 2, 3, 4, and hold 2, 3, 4. Exhale 2, 3, 4, and hold 2, 3, 4, and breathe. And that, as I said, is meant with time to send lots of oxygen to the brain and send messages of safety and help regulate. So that's a little something you can take away and practice at moments when you feel the anxiety starting in your tummy. Okay, so interpersonal relationships. Well, my goodness. Interpersonal relationships in adulthood are inevitably impacted by the whole of our lives. They're impacted by our own unique personalities, and we all have those. It's impacted by our personalities in conjunction with the families that we grew up with, for better or worse. Impacts with experiences during our childhood, our adolescence and adult lives. It's also impacted by the community attitudes and information, community attitudes about parenting, community attitudes about adoption, and the information that you had about your own. It's impacted by how adoption was spoken of and treated in the household that you grew up in. And your interpersonal relationships in adulthood are also part of and perhaps supported by any healthy relationships that you have had throughout life. All of these things come to make up the way in which we conduct and manage our relationships now. So relationships are based on a concept of attachment, and I'm sure that you've all come across that before. And but I thought we would run through that. It's fairly basic. So attachment are those affective bonds that we develop, or the infant develops, between themselves and their parents or their caregivers. It is almost an inbuilt thing. We all, as infants, have to attach to an adult in order to survive. And we form close and dependent bonds with our primary caregivers, and they can be good and they can be tricky. Through day-to-day interactions with parents and caregivers, children need to be able to express what they need, what they feel, and they need to be assured that their needs are going to be met in a nuanced and reasonable and caring way. Children need to know that they can play safely, that they can explore the world, that they can experiment, that they can feel happy and sad, and that when they don't feel safe, when there's a threat to them in some way, that they're able to go back to their primary caregivers and receive affection, to laugh, show enjoyment. Because the adults that they return to are the ones who provide that safe base for the rest of our lives. They're the ones that help infants and children as they grow to regulate, to develop a sense of the world and a sense of themselves. And if all goes well, we develop a strong sense of who we are, a positive, strong sense of who we are. However, attachment is a two-way process. It's not just the child attaching to the adult, it's the caregiver needing to respond in an attuned and appropriate way to the child's needs. They need to be able to meet those needs, to understand them, first of all, to meet them in a timely and developmentally appropriate way, and meet them in a way that's not going to frighten or scare the child. And it's not just meeting them through action or words, but it's all those non-verbal cues that parents give to children that can develop that sense of I'm worthwhile and I'm fine and I'm safe, or can give them the opposite meaning. As I've just said before, parents help infants and children to emotionally regulate and contribute to they contribute to the development of a sense of trust in those who look after them, and that increasingly positive view of themselves and others. So you can see in this slide, children expect protection and comfort. And when the comfort of a caregiver is optimal, they integrate thinking and feeling, they begin to feel confident, and they begin to able to approach life in a positive way. But caregivers have to be available, sensitive, attuned, flexible, responsive, and good enough. We all make mistakes as parents, and our caregivers make mistakes as well. But it's how they then repair when there's a bit of a rift in the relationship. It's how those caregivers then repair that relationship that says to the child, it's okay to make a mistake and we can move on and we can still resume a good relationship. So these relationships at their best help us develop that inner working model of ourselves and of others, of relationships, of the world. They influence how we perceive other people's responses to us. It influences how we think. It affects our relationships and the patterns of our relationships throughout adulthood. So individual development arises out of the relationship between our minds, our bodies, our brains, between the infant and the caregiver, but they're also held in a network of family and friends, of culture and environment. And even 70s was often in a culture of secrecy, a culture of disapproval for being a single parent, a culture that said, keep this a secret, a child doesn't need to know, and all will be well. And we know now, so many years later, that that's not the best message or environment. And environments now have changed, but the impacts of those early experiences and environments linger and impact the relationships we have as adults. Firstly, I think it's really important to know that many adopted adults have had good enough childhoods. Not perfect, but they're good enough. And they will say that they've been able to get on with their lives, they've been able to develop reasonable relationships, that they've been able to heal in some ways throughout their lives. This doesn't mean that there are not still issues that they need to tackle throughout adulthood. It doesn't mean that there still isn't anxiety or concern about abandonment. It doesn't mean that anxiety levels fluctuate or that rage can be so overpowering at times that they don't know what to do with themselves. Because we know that all adopted people face disruption right from the word go. Separation from their mothers, often a period in a hospital nursery and or an orphanage or foster care, followed by another disruption as they are then placed with their adoptive family. Because of those disruptions, we know that some infants may not like to be held, or they're inconsolable, they aren't easily soothed. Some infants will actually become extremely quiet and not able to feed and find that they take solace in sleeping. How this then unfolds for an infant who's been placed has a lot to do with the care, the attuned care that they receive from their adoptive parents. And we all know that most adoptive parents were not supported to understand what it might mean for a child. There was a belief that a child was a blank slate, that environment would mould everything and that they will forget all of these experiences. And there was no credence given to the fact that all of these experiences are held in our bodies and are experienced in different ways. So many adoptive parents did not know how to soothe. They did not know how to speak about adoption. They did not know how to help a child who was adopted feel secure, safe, and worthwhile, and particularly how to integrate the various identities that they then have to juggle throughout their lives. We also know that some adoptive parents, and I'm not excusing anything here, but just stating that we know some adoptive parents never felt connected to their adopted children, and adopted children know this. They can feel that lack of fit, and that then impacts on identity and sense of security. We know that many adoptive parents were dealing with their own losses and that these weren't dealt with in a way that was going to be positive for the child that they had adopted. And all of these, I guess, disruptive experiences for the growing child, the young adult, and the adult that you are now can mean that experiences, people can find emotional experiences difficult to understand. They can find it hard to understand emotions in others. It can be very difficult to self-regulate at certain times. Anxiety and depression I've spoken about. There can be feelings of negative self-worth, difficulty feeling secure and safe in relationships, difficulty relying on others. There can be anxiety about the closeness of intimacy, and there can be a sense of isolation or disconnection. And all of these things have made some people very vulnerable as they grew up, and they have been subject to other forms of abuse during adolescence and early adulthood. I think these experiences can also, even for those who have done well throughout their lives. All of these feelings and experiences can re-emerge at important points during adult life. Finding a romantic partner or having a breakup in a romantic relationship can be extremely distressing, and even more so than people without an adoption experience. The death of a loved one or the separation from a loved one, as we all know, can form all sorts of challenging experiences. The loss of a friendship and the loss of a much-loved pet can cause very deep sadness and distress. There can also be a multitude of relationships that have to be negotiated in adulthood. How do people as adults negotiate or renegotiate their relationships with their adoptive families? Do they choose to do this, or is it better that they move away? If people search for birth families and have connection with them, how do they negotiate the trickiness of those relationships over time? And we know that if those relationships don't yield the sort of contact that people would like, then that can reignite those deep sadnesses and sense of abandonment in people. We also know that these earlier experiences can impact the way we conduct ourselves in our friendships and our workplaces, and that sometimes we may not pick up cues that are appropriate, or that we may read into more than there is. People can often talk about, overthinking things because of anxiety and concern. So when things aren't quite right, and I'm thinking here of close relationships more than passing relationships, people can experience the need to be very close or clingy, and perhaps their partner doesn't like that and perhaps doesn't understand. Sometimes people can behave in a way that others might perceive as selfish or manipulative, but really the person is feeling vulnerable and is just trying to get what they feel they need to quieten that fear or that sense of vulnerability that they have. In intimate partnerships, people can shy away from intimacy by pushing them away, which in turn, of course, often means friends don't want to be close to us, and that then can just be this vicious cycle of reinforcing our belief that we are unloved. And I've spoken to women in particular who have experienced some of these feelings when their children are born. There was one gorgeous woman I spoke to, and I asked her if she was an attentive mother, and she said she was so attentive she lived the first 6 months of her infant's life with one foot in the crib day and night. She was so anxious that there wasn't a separation. And equally, I've spoken to other women who say they couldn't allow themselves to really love their child or to feel love for them until they were about 3 years old, again, because of this deep-seated anxiety that they wouldn't be together past that age. We know that at times people, when they're threatened or anxious, can lose their cool, they can overreact, they can criticise, they can fall into arguments with their partner that their partner doesn't understand and can storm out of the house. Then everyone feels misunderstood and uncared for, and that sense of abandonment can be magnified yet again. And often at this point, intimate partners don't know what to do, and they feel they're at a loss. They feel push and pull. Just as the adoptive person is pushed and pulled by all of these emotions, so can partners. What do I do? I love this person, but I can't manage it. If some partners also perhaps did not have a great upbringing and can feel insecure, they can lash out verbally or physically. But People with an insecure early experience can stay in that relationship because to leave it can be worse than remaining. Sometimes there's just that distance that forms and people can feel alone and isolated. And what we're talking about here with all of these experiences, and again, you may have heard of this, it's a window of tolerance. And this is something coined by, I think he's a psychoanalyst, but he's also a pediatrician called Dan Siegel. And in that green band in the center of that diagram is that optimal zone where, all being well, we just sort of move along each day in that zone. And things are going along quite okay. But then a trigger might happen, and if we are aroused, hyper aroused, we'll feel that we may not register consciously, but we may feel we need to either flee, get away from the situation, or fight. And when that happens, we have all sorts of physiological reactions, such as increased heart rate, anxiety, adrenaline goes to our extremities, to our hands and our feet, so that we can actually flee. But what happens then is that our judgment's often impaired. We often have racing thoughts and we think only in one way. We can't see the breadth of what's happening. We can feel too much and we can react emotionally and in a distressed way. We can be hypervigilant, we can panic, anger, we can become angry or agitated. So we start to go off into this top pink area where we were off the chart potentially, and somehow we've got to get back to this optimal zone, and that can take a long time. We've got to think about how we soothe ourselves, how we ground ourselves, how we come down from being hyper aroused. For other people, however, when there's that threat or that fear, instead of going off the charts, they actually go off the charts the other way. They start to shut down. They can start feeling little. They can start feeling a lack of sensation, numbness, isolated. They withdraw. They can feel depressed, hopeless. There's no way out of this. They can shut down and they freeze. And some people actually do what's called association. It's just automatic. They almost take themselves away from that situation that is so overwhelming and threatening until they're able to come back up into this green zone. They need to be gently stimulated, oriented in time and place, and brought back into that zone where they feel comfortable. And this can happen when there's an external threat or there's an internal threat. And while this is happening to you, this can also be happening to your partner, and that's when things get out of kilter in relationships. Before I move on, is everyone traveling okay? Yep. Okay. If you need to, just take a breath for a moment and we'll move on. Okay. So because we're built for relationships, as discussed when we talked about the child and the parent relationship, healing for us often comes through relationships. And that can be very hard to believe if you're someone who has been extremely independent and learned to rely solely on yourself. But believe it or not, that's the truth. Whether the relationship is with a counsellor or therapist, whether it's a relationship with a very important friend, whether it's a relationship with a partner or a child, in the end, we all need relationships to affirm who we are, to recognise who we truly are, and to help us move through our life in the best way we can. So I think as we start to look to how we are healing ourselves and can heal ourselves, I think one of the first things in this little box up the top here, recognising and understanding the impacts of our adoption. That's so important, that you are able to, in the quiet space, either in a group of friends or a support group, on your own or with counsellors, to be able to start mapping what your adoption was like and how it's impacted, and reflecting quite deeply on that. And that often can need some support, because it can be a challenging journey. And I think when you're aware of that, that's something that you can share with your intimate partner and perhaps a close friend if you ever want to. But that might go into some way to their understanding what your experience has been. I think in this next box, understanding the systemic impacts and the harmful narratives and languages that you may have experienced throughout your life. I think through the forced adoption apology, and through many stories that I've heard from people, and through stories that I've heard from birth mothers and fathers, there is an understanding that the way in which adoption worked in those awful years was not humane for anybody, and that those systems have had an impact on people. That system didn't help adoptive parents understand your needs. It didn't help them to know how to speak to you about adoption in a way that was open, non-judgmental, non-blaming, that it was something that was part of your life that they would help you understand and negotiate. So they weren't assisted to do that, and neither were you as you grew. We know that there were narratives in the wider, sometimes in the extended family, about what it meant to be an adopted person. We know that at school there were often taunts and remarks made that led people to feel on the outer and not part of it. And for partners to understand that can be quite important, particularly if they're not adopted and they have never experienced anything like that, to be the other in a family or in a community group. Again, that's something that you may need to share with them when you're feeling you're able to do that. And they still may not get the deep understanding that you have, but it may help them in some measure. Oops, I'll go back. I've got here in this box a strong, supportive relationship. We all need strong, supportive relationships. And as you start to think about your adoption and its impact over your life, I would also encourage you to think about those relationships, whether they be school friends, current friends, whoever they might be, who have been supportive and strong and given you a sense of worth and being cared for. We all need that. And I know from people I've met that if they didn't have that with their adoptive parents, some people were fortunate to have grandparents or an aunt or an uncle, or sometimes a teacher or a youth leader who actually saw them and supported them and cared for them. So I would reflect on who those people were and who they are now, because they can give you hope. They saw you, they acknowledged you. And if your partner sees and acknowledges you, or many parts of you, value that, because that is such a gift for everybody, for all of us. As you move through understanding your adoption. I've said here, process loss and grief. My goodness. How do you do that? That's the work of a lifetime, perhaps. But that is something that, with time and with the right supports, that the hold of loss and grief can diminish. It may rear its ugly head at times of significance, as I mentioned before, death of loved ones, separations, birth of children, and so on. But we would like that loss and grief not to be the day-to-day experience. So that's going to need to be tackled. And that often can be done well in counselling if you get the right counsellor who understands the nuances of adoption. Certainly support groups can help that, but it's something that needs to be dealt with and put in its place so that it's not controlling you, because you are more than all of this put together. These are part of you, but they're also separate to you. I've said here, connecting with other adoptees can help you understand yourself as well. And these 3 boxes down here, I'm going to tackle separately in the next couple of slides. And the first one is being compassionate to yourself and to others. So, believe it or not, sometimes we are our own worst critics, and we can be very unkind to ourselves and very judgmental, and we can tell ourselves we're not worth anything. But that's something when that starts to walk across your mind, you've got to talk to it. You've got to pay attention to the present moment, and without judgment, but with compassion, say that that's not true, that thought of worthlessness or abandonment, that's not the whole story. So we need to be aware of pain and suffering, and that what we experienced was hard, but we also need to be kind to ourselves, to be calm, and to help soften and calm the threats that we feel to ourselves. And that opposite of self-compassion is criticism and self-judgment. So that's something that has to be worked on every day. And when those self-critical and self-judging thoughts come up, even try that little box breathing as a first step. That might help to some degree. I've then said here, one of the things all of us need to do is understand how our bodies respond as well as what we feel. Often before we think, or even before we feel emotion, or as we're feeling it, we will feel something in our bodies. We might feel the tightness in the tummy or the chest. We might feel the throat is constricting, the shoulders are getting tight. We might feel our head's going to explode, or we get a headache. Some people feel their hands and wrists clench, that their body becomes rigid. So if you can tune into your body and understand that these are all signs of some sort of threat, you can start to address it, even as the emotion starts. You can start to calm through breathing, some people love to be wrapped in a blanket, have something heavy. Some people just need to move to shift those feelings and that in the body and the emotion. Some people like to make a drink or to eat something, not too much hopefully, but we do. Whatever works for you to soothe and start to just get back into that green zone, so you can think, what is it that's triggering this now, and how can I deal with that? And as you become more aware of that, how your body reacts, how you react emotionally, you can tell your partner that. You can tell your friends that. I think this is happening now and I'm feeling this. And they might say, well, what can we do? And that might be something that you have to talk about in a calmer moment. What's going to help you that they can do to help you? What is it they can do to help you? Sometimes it might be giving you space. Sometimes it might be holding you. Sometimes it might be just being there without even touching you. Sometimes it might even be afterwards being able to say to both of you, to each other, I'm really sorry for this. This is just, it happens, and we're going to have to get some help for this. So this is back to this zones of arousal. So when you're up here, when you're off the planet, when you're shouting and screaming, maybe you need to walk away from each other. We need space. I'm going out into the garden. I'm going to have a bath. I'm going to put on my heaviest jacket and loud music because that helps me. You then need to be aware of where you are at the time. So if you are able to work out you're rejecting me or you're not listening to me, just like my adoptive parents never listened to me, I can't stand it. You walk away, and then when you're in a place that is safe, you think, okay, I'm going to calm my breathing, I'm going to relax my shoulders, I'm going to keep myself warm and comfortable. I'm in my safe space. I can see the walls. I can feel the floor. These aren't my adoptive parents. They're not here now. My partner hasn't understood, but we'll sort that out together. You get back into that green zone, and when you're back there and he or she's back there, then you're able to think about how you're going to handle this on another occasion. And the same with if you're someone who gets understimulated, and instead of going, off the planet, you feel isolated, you've got to curl up in a ball, you just want to cry for the whole day, you feel depressed, hopeless, shut down. Breathing first of all, whatever comforts you, but you must tell yourself that this will pass. That hopelessness doesn't stay forever. Depression doesn't stay forever. There are ways beyond this. And when you're back in that green zone again, to be able to talk to your partner, if they can listen, about what happens to you. And then perhaps you go together to talk to someone who can help you sort this out, if that's not something you can do together. Through all of these things that you might do, Dan Siegel again says, a coherent narrative is a source of strength and resilience. So in the beginning of the presentation, I was talking to you about exploring the history of your adoption. Now, you may do this on your own. You may do this through getting records. You may do this through talking to people. You may decide that to revisit that is too much on your own, and you may decide to seek professional help. Whatever you do it with compassion for yourself. Look after yourself. If you go to see a professional, keep in mind that you have the right to get someone who you feel understands you and is in tune with you. And if that doesn't work for you, you can change, because this is such a personal and deep journey. As you author your own story, as you piece together what happened, what it meant for you as you were growing and in your adult life, as you perhaps understand the challenges that stopped your adoptive parents from being the parents that were going to give you the best upbringing, perhaps as you meet your birth family and have to process and understand their reactions to you, and then process again your feelings about whatever that's raised. Do that with compassion. Take your time. Understand it. Your experiences of loss and grief need to be validated, but then, if at the right moment, moved beyond. To stay in loss and grief harms yourself over long term. I know that sounds terrible to say, but it does. And it is part of you, but it's not the whole of you. And so looking for all of those strengths that have allowed you to survive till now and to create the relationships you have, they need to be seen also and acknowledged and cheered on. Understanding the impact of the system, as I said, harmful narratives and language, that is there, and often you will see that in records. That is no longer the way you will be referred to. It's no longer the way you have to be referred to. And I would hope that the community will learn that they have to be careful of the way language is used, because it can be very hurtful. The problem, the challenges you have experienced are part of you, but they're not the whole of you. They can be placed there, and you who you were meant to be and who are can move through that. Believe it or not, being adopted and living through the challenges that you have all lived through creates an empathy that many people in the community don't have. You're empathetic to the complexity of family, identity, belonging, and loss. Sometimes you can be too empathetic, and that barrier has to be strengthened so that you don't lose yourself in the feelings of others. And that can happen in your relationships. When people go on a journey to explore what it means to be adopted, they can validate and process their loss and grief. They can construct authentic and secure relationships, and not perfect, because no relationship ever is, but it can be relationships that are good enough for you and for me and for your partner, and emerge with a strength and sense of self and autonomy that I hope will give a sense of satisfaction. So while there are triggers at different milestones, there is hope, and there can be autonomy, and there can be healing. But nevertheless, I think when you go on that journey, all of you, you're some of the bravest people I have ever met, and I know that there will be some very good things for you that come from that. Well, that's all I've got to say. I don't know, before we go into the questions and reflections, I wonder if we might just sit very quietly for a moment, and if you would just like to breathe in and out, and then just bring yourself back into the room where you are. You look as if you're in a safe spot, your own special place. You look comfortable. You've got your chair, your familiar couches behind your back. Your feet are on the floor that you know. You're surrounded by objects that are important to you. And you're back in your own space now, and just breathe quietly. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then hand over to Sally Rose, and she will bring forth some of the questions. Thank you everyone for listening, by the way.